I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual.
起立，面向佛堂，参加三鞠躬、一鞠躬、再鞠躬、三鞠躬，参加各位点传世一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Please be seated.
So previously, what we did was that we divided up the chapter into 3 sections. So if you recall, section 1 is all about the 5 colors, 5 sounds, and 5 flavors, and they signify the many different ways, the many different things in the material world that can serve to distract or tempt you away from your path. Section 2, which we were also able to cover last time, is about our activities in the material world, our struggles, all the strife here described as metaphorical racing and hunting. So previously, we talked about racing is similar to when we talk about the rat race. Hunting will be the pursuit of fame and fortune. So that ties in to the line below about goods that are difficult to acquire, and whether it's racing or hunting or acquiring rare goods or difficult to acquire goods, all of these have profoundly negative effects to life. Finally, last time, we were able to get to section 3, the final section, and we were even able to talk about line 6. And we spoke of the difference between the stomach and the eyes. So the last point that we were talking about previously was that the stomach represented the basic needs of life, the simple needs, what you really need, as opposed to what you want, what you desire, which is represented by the eyes. So sages care for the stomach, the basic simple needs of life, the necessities, and not the eyes, the things that you see that you don't actually need, but because you see them, you want them. In other words, desires. So we're now ready to tackle the last line. I'll step back a little bit, and then we'll take another look at line 6 and then go into line 7, so we can talk about discarding the other and take this. Get rid of that and hold on to this. So important for us to talk about what that represents and what this represents. So, as I said, the stomach, in Mandarin, fu, meaning stomach represents sustenance, the basics of life, the bare necessities. Let me just inject a note here. This is not just about food that you need to survive, food that you need to live. It's also about intellectual, mental, and spiritual sustenance. Because man does not live on bread alone. You need a whole bunch of other things other than food, other than calories in your intake. So, note of caution from before was that when we talk about the stomach here, it isn't a reference having to do with greed, gluttony, overindulgence. And what I also mentioned before was that Eastern sages from authentic traditions make a very big deal out of practical applications of the Tao to life. That is, all the concepts that we touch on, everything we talk about, they should be readily applicable to everyday living. They should not be these high-minded concepts that have little or no relevance to your everyday life. And my criticism of a particular style of study of the Tao is that it tends to be too much head in the clouds, talking about these ethereal concepts when all I really want to know is, tell me how I can use this. Tell me how this applies to life. And then let's also quickly talk about the eyes. Mu is the Mandarin pronunciation for the eyes. So here, just like stomach is not the real stomach, is not the physical stomach, here the eyes are not the physical eyes. It means the cause of temptations. What the eyes see, the heart will desire. So if you keep in mind the things that we read about in section 1, the first section of this chapter, the 5 colors blind the eyes. So this is a pretty good interpretation that the 5 colors represents all the different colorful acquisitions that you can pursue. And the pursuits, once again, is the hunt in the material world. The hunting, the chasing after of all the colorful things confuses the mind, causes your spiritual self to lose its way. So you can now see how everything ties together. This line ties to just a couple of lines ago about hunting and racing, and ties back to the very first line about the 5 colors blinding the eyes. Thus, the sage minds the eyes, that is, the sage actively manages the perception that can lead to desires. So another way to say it, the way that it's expressed is that sages care for the stomach and not the eyes. Don't care for the eyes. Instead, be cautious about the eyes. Be mindful of the eyes. Actively manage the eyes. And by the way, you can always tell when someone is on the right track in explaining and interpreting the Tao Te Ching. You can tell when a line toward the very end ties back to a line in the beginning or the middle of the chapter. That is the nature of the Tao Te Ching. Every chapter ties in with itself. Okay, I think we're ready for the very last line. Now, we want to talk about discarding that or discarding the other. So, what is the other? What is that? What is the other that should be discarded? So, now that we're on the last line, having gone through the previous 6 lines, we now know that which should be discarded can be the following: temptations and distractions, like the 5 colors, the kaleidoscopic material world with all the colorful things, all the temptations, all the distractions. We would discard those. We discard them so that we would not be tempted or distracted. Now, we also talked about the 5 sounds. So just like the 5 colors really represent the negative things in life, the things that can distract you away from your true path, the 5 sounds are the things that you hear that can take you away from your true path. So those are the negative words, words that are untrue, unkind, or useless. When we talk about words that are untrue, unkind, or useless, that reminds me of the 3 filters. Some people call it the 3 filters of Socrates. So it comes from a story where supposedly Socrates was approached by a friend who wanted to tell him something. Socrates stopped him and asked, well, what you're about to say, do you know that it's true? And the friend says, well, I don't know, maybe it is. Then Socrates says, okay, regardless of whether or not it's true, is it a good thing? Is it a kind thing to say? And his friend says, no, it's it's a rumor. I'm about to tell you. And then Socrates says, well, is it useful or necessary? And his friend thinks about it, says, well, I wouldn't actually call it useful or necessary. So then Socrates points out that, well, if it's, not exactly true that you know of, and it's unkind, and that it's useless and unnecessary, then why do you want to tell me? So that became known as the three filters of Socrates. So there's historians who will point out that Socrates probably didn't say it, that this was probably wrongfully attributed to him. It probably came from a different source, but I think it's pretty good advice in life that we want to take a look at the five sounds, listen for the five sounds, and then put them through the filters as well. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it useful or necessary? And if it's not, why should I pay attention to it? I should discard those words. So in a moment, I'll give everyone a real life example, and then I want to kind of push everybody a little bit, not just talk about things that can be taken as cliches or platitude, but to dig in a little bit deeper and say, really? What about this? What about that? So in a moment, we'll get there. So what are some of the other things that we should discard? Physical pleasures that make you jaded. That is, pleasures that initially seem intense, and a lot of addiction falls into this category, but then later on, you seek that same buzz or same high, and you can't quite get there, so you have to up the dosage. You have to increase the stimulation. So ever more powerful stimulus will eventually render you overstimulated and numb. So you want to head that off at the pass and not get into things that can be addictive in the first place. And here's another thing to discard: the mad dash to get from one place to another. Why? Most of the time, we're not fighting some sort of emergency, fighting against the clock, racing against the clock to get to a place on time. In my life, I would say that it's 99.9% of the time, I don't have some sort of emergency that requires that I get to a particular place in a mad dash. So I should really discard the tendency to be in a rush. Another one, stepping on other people to get to what you want. So this is part of the rat race that we're all familiar with. People tend to scramble, step over one another just to get to what they want. And I always remember, this adage that says you should be careful who you step on as you make your way to the top, because when you come back down, you will encounter every single one of the people that you have stepped on. And lastly, things that may be desired by many, the precious things that are of high value, but things that, although desired, actually contribute little or no real value to your life. So many material possessions are like that. It's kind of fun and neat to have it, but the novelty wears off. Sort of like the addicting power of a physical pleasure, it wears off, so you have to go get some more. So one can also say that the drive to acquire ever more physical material objects is an addiction of a sort, is a stimulation of a sort. So these are the things that we would describe. So 3 filters of Socrates, allegedly. Just as a reminder to everyone, filter number one is truth. So here, I'll quote the 10 Commandments. One of them, thou shalt not bear false witness. If you were to speak with experienced pastors, they will tell you that thou shalt not bear false witness applies to more than just a courtroom. It's not just a court of law. It's a general commandment on speaking the truth, not passing on false rumors. So this is an area where many people fail, even if they supposedly follow the 10 Commandments. They will pass along a piece of information that supports their cause, their team, their political party, uncritically. They'll pass it to all their friends, even though if they were to look into it more deeply, they may realize that it's actually false or maybe just a misleading half-truth. I see a lot of that. So those are the things that would never make it past the first filter. Number 2, kindness, goodness. This is where I drill down a little bit further to challenge everybody. So what if something is not true, but it's kind or it's good? So here's an example. I want to put this question to everyone. Suppose your friends have gotten together and pooled their resources to give you a present. Now, the present happens to be something you don't like, so they made a mistake. Or something you already own, so it's a duplicate. But you happen to know that your friends had gone through a lot of trouble to get that present for you. Their hearts are in the right place. They mean well. Now, as they present the gift to you, they're all looking at you expectantly. They're all like, yeah, so what do you think? As you unwrap the presents and realize that it's something you don't like. So what do you say? So let me put that out to the group. You know, we talk about what's real. We talk about what's practical. Well, this is a realistic situation. You know that this can occur. So what does everyone think? Is it okay to say, I love it, when you don't? Is it okay to say, you guys kept the receipts, right? What do you say? So I see some pretty good insights. Blind truth is not always the priority. And Barry points out, it is not polite to open presents in front of those who gave it to you. So Barry, that by the way is also the Chinese custom, is to thank everyone and then open the present in private. Martin, good point. It is compassionate to accept gracefully. Also, wisdom from Walt. It's not the gift, but the intent of the giver that counts. Just say thank you. And Walt, I would absolutely agree with you. You're not called upon to render a judgment on the spot. But I would say, as a Tao cultivator, you need to be practicing gratitude at all times. And that will be a perfect opportunity to think about what wonderful friends you have that have gone through a lot of trouble to get you something something that they thought you would enjoy. So that thought is of value. That thought is more precious than any material belonging. So Daniel, good idea. Accept the gift and give it to someone else who you think will enjoy it more, much like the wealthy man who was too stressed to enjoy his garden. That's a reference to one of the stories from the Tao of daily life. Thank you for that. So yeah, regifting is always a possibility, although I would add that you want to do the regifting skillfully. And I say that only because I've received as a regift something that I had previously gifted to someone else. All right, so excellent input. Guys, let's go to filter number 3. Usefulness or necessity. Sometimes there are things that should be or must be said, even if they may be unkind. But I would also say it's very tricky. In my life, I have tended to look to filter number 2 first and foremost, to be kind, to be good, to be gentle, to be compassionate, as we have just pointed out. So, as Martin says, it is compassionate to accept gracefully, and as well says, it's a good idea, it's a good opportunity to give thanks. This is especially relevant as Thanksgiving is almost upon us. So, as I look at the 3 filters, I'm reminded of a true story of this particular person by the name of Florence Foster Jenkins. So she was a socialite, passed away a long time ago now. So there was a movie made about her life with her name as the movie title. It's very well done. So what happened was that her heart was definitely in the right place. She wanted to sing to entertain the troops. This was back in the days of World War II. Now, she was a musical prodigy, but her talents did not extend to her vocal talent. So her singing was actually quite horrible, but she did not realize that. But then she's looking at everybody around her because of her wealth and influence. Everybody kept telling her how good she was. So she had no awareness of how she was lacking. So you may think that in that situation, it will be a good thing to bring to her awareness that her singing was awful, to save her from becoming a laughingstock. But I'll say that the real life, works in strange and interesting ways. Although her singing was not the professional level that she imagined it to be, when her records was out, it actually had a tremendously positive effect on the soldiers returning from World War II. Now remember, a lot of them were suffering from what we now today know as the post-traumatic stress syndrome. Back then, they just called it shell-shocked. So they found it so hilarious. They laughed, maybe not for the reasons that she had in mind, but they thought of it as comedy, and it brightened their days. One particular wounded soldier even said, a historical fact, that listening to her sing, having that belly laugh reminded him how good it was to live, lifted him out of his depression. So the people who were being kind to Florence Foster Jenkins, not telling her how awful she sounded, had inadvertently created some positive karma that contributed in a positive way to some people's lives. So this is the reason why I want to take every aspect of a situation into account, and if I have any doubts about which way to go, I would tend toward the compassionate side. So this is not to say that you should always tell white lies. Maybe not. This is saying, my perspective is that you always have to take it on a case-by-case basis. You always have to exercise your critical faculties. That is natural because your mind is a nature-given gift. Okay, so we're definitely nearing the end of our talk on this particular chapter, and Florence Foster Jenkins is actually not the story that I wanted to share with everyone. First, let's talk about what it means to take this. We know what to discard, but what about this? What is it that we should take? So the sages take this, which we now know can be, for instance, refining one's own spirituality. That includes Tao cultivation, perhaps your regular meditative session, perhaps listening to the Tao meeting every week, perhaps reading some books that will help you toward the overall quest of spiritual self-refinement. Second one here, strengthening one's connection with others. You know, reconnecting with someone you haven't talked to in a while, to let someone know that you care about them, that you love them, strengthening your connection with them. Another thing to take, the few choice words that speak volumes. That is, rather than to take, quote unquote, take, being very verbose, it would be better to take this, which is to be very, very concise in your choice of words, so that you say just a few words, but those few words speak volumes. Better yet, go from there to the next level. Go to the level where you take the silence that says everything, because there are times when you don't need to say anything at all, and saying anything would actually spoil the moment. So look for opportunities where you can take the silence that says everything that needs to be said. Another thing to take, simplicity in life. This means discarding complexity to take on ever more simplicity in your own life. Harmonious balance. I always think of simplicity in life as moving toward oneness. You know, nothing is quite as simple as the one. So moving toward oneness is to discard all the things that I don't need. That's simplicity. Harmonious balance, I always think of that as being associated with the number 2, that two sides must come together in harmonious fashion, and the interplay of the complementary duality gives rise to miracles and wonders. And then the Tao itself. Sometimes I think of the Tao as the one, the only thing, the one thing, the unity. Other times, I think of the Tao as zero, the void, the nothingness. The nothingness, like the silence that says everything, the nothingness, that is everything. So, all of these is included in the this that Tao cultivators and sages would take. So we're getting toward the end, so I want to just do a brief recap. I consider this to be absolutely necessary before we do the paraphrase. We'll do the paraphrase next time, but here's a brief recap of what this chapter is all about. When you understand and absorb this recap, you will find that the story that I will tell you next time about a certain teapot, you will find that story to be especially meaningful. So here's the recap. Remember, the 5 colors, 5 sounds, and 5 flavors, they all refer to the bewildering temptations of the material world. Racing and hunting from the middle of the chapter refer to all the frantic rush, friction, and even conflicts arising from our activities in the material world. This is what I referred to when I said, the rat race, the dog-eat-dog world, etc. Stepping over one another to get to what you want. So that is a reference to hunting and racing. Now you can see the first 2 bullet points are distinctively different. The first one is about the things that exist in the material world, and the second bullet is about what we do in the material world. Then the bottom 2 bullet points are both in blue, and they answer the question of what should we do, also from the chapter. So in the face of all this, activities and material things, temptations, distractions, in the face of all this, we should mind the basics, what the stomach needs, rather than the temptations, what the eyes see. And then lastly, the last recap, we also have to be ready and willing to discard that. What is that? All the colors, sounds, and flavors, in order to hold on to this. What is this? The one thing that matters, and that is the Tao. So here in this one slide, you have a recap for the essence of this particular chapter. We'll take a look at this again. It's a very good tonic to prep you for the story about the teapot, and that's next time. We're getting close to the end now, so let me jump ahead. The summary slide has a specific intent. That specific intent is practical application. The realization for this slide is that we can't all become sages instantaneously. So many of us will require that we take smaller steps on our way to sagehood. So this slide is intended to help everyone approach that state of becoming wise like a sage. So these steps are framed as questions. First question, is it absolutely necessary for you to run yourself ragged in the rat race like everyone else? So I want to ask you to contemplate that question in your mind. Now, I don't mean that you should, distance yourself from civilization, go off into the mountains and become a hermit. Not at all. What I do want is to ask you the follow-up question. What will happen if you mentally step out of the race and observe it as a spectator? What will happen? What would you see? What would you notice about the toll that other people are paying as they are still participating in the race? So this I would characterize as the first step toward you coming up with a way to deal with the rat race overall. On rare goods and other material things, first question, what are some things you treasure above all? This is a serious question. I really do want everyone to ask yourself that exact question. I've answered that question myself. What are some things you treasure above all? I'm speaking specifically of goods, material things. And how would you feel if they are lost, damaged, or stolen? So, last question. Do all your sentimental items have to be kept as physical objects? What do I mean by that? Well, sometimes you have things that are material objects that you hold on to, perhaps like a photo album because it has sentimental value. Sometimes it may be an object that someone has left you and it has great sentimental value. Perhaps it's a book that has changed your life and therefore it has great sentimental value. So whatever it is, these material objects that are precious to you may not be, jewelry, may not be high value, rare goods, but may have great sentimental value. My question to you then is, do they have to be physical objects? Technology being the way it is today, we have ways to take a small step toward discarding clutter in our lives. The photos that you treasure in the photo album, perhaps they can be stored in the cloud. The books that have changed your life, perhaps you don't need to hang on to them as physical books, but perhaps keep them as e-books. So I want to get you to start thinking in those directions as a way to deal with the essence of this particular chapter.
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架各位顶传十一鞠躬，结班一鞠躬。We're done, everybody. Thank you so much.